what kind of things bring you comfort? What can I do to help make sure that you feel safe today? Knowing those things so that I can both not aggravate you and also bring you comfort is all about what I consider birth vibes, so that even if things go different than you thought, that you still can leave that experience feeling informed, empowered, and supported.
Motherhood is all-consuming.
Having babies, nursing, feeling the fear of loving someone that much.
And there's this baby on your chest, and boom, your entire life has changed.
It's a privilege of being your child's safest space and watching your heart walk around outside of your body.
The truth is, I can be having the best time being a mum 1 minute, and then the next I'm questioning all my life choices.
I'm Lo Mansfield, your host of the Lo and Behold podcast. Mama of 4 littles, former labor and postpartum RN, CLC, and your new best friend in the messy middle space of all the choices you are making in pregnancy, birth, and motherhood. If there is one thing I know after years of delivering babies at the bedside and then having and now raising those 4 of my own, it is that there is no such thing as a best way to do any of this. And we're leaning into that truth here. With a mix of real life and what the textbook says, expert insights, and practical applications, each week we're making our way towards stories that we participate in, stories that we are honest about, and stories that are ours. This is the Lo and Behold podcast. I feel like I have started off a ton of episodes saying the same things, right? I'm so excited for today's guest. I can't wait to put them in front of you. So-and-so is a labor and delivery or a birth queen. I've even probably said this before, right? That I keep repeating myself, but today's guest is another one of all those things. I have Jen Hamilton with me today. I would honestly be a little surprised if you haven't heard her name. I'm guessing you might already follow along, but if you don't, I would assume after today's combo that you will be interested in doing so. Jen is a labor and delivery nurse with more than a decade of bedside experience helping mothers and families navigate one of the most impactful experiences of their lives, which is, of course, the birth of your babies. Jen is a viral TikTok creator. She has a social media following of more than 6 million people, which is so mind-blowing sometimes to think about across all of the different platforms she is known for. And I can affirm this as well from my own years of following along with her. Blending clinical expertise with frank humor, empathy, and real-world insight into healthcare, she really does an amazing job of just sharing a little bit of all of it. And you don't always know what you're going to get, but you are always here for it, if that makes sense. Jen was the recipient of the 2026 President's Award from the American Nurses Association, which is very, very cool. She continues to use her platform to educate, uplift, and humanize the reality of nursing, patient care, and mental health. And I would say also the reality of the patient experience, almost like getting into your shoes and kind of talking about what it is to be you, particularly when you are having these babes. Jen has a new book coming out, Birth Vibes, Stories and Strategies for an Empowered Birth, and it comes out on May 5th. So if you are listening to this in the present moment, you can pre-order now and it is available to you tomorrow. And you will hear me mention this when Jen and I chat, but I would highly recommend the audio version as well. All right, let's get into this conversation. Jen Hamilton, what a sweet treat for me to finally meet you, truly and virtually. Anyway, I think that I am probably one of millions who have loved that you share so much about all aspects of your life. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for that, because I think it's really fun to see the real person behind the healthcare provider, or I don't know, the wellness influencer, whoever. Everyone has these things that they stand behind, but also I think you do a really good job of sharing the real you as well, which is why so many people seem to love you. So I know I already kind of introed and said what you do, but what would you say to the like, hey, Jen, who are you question?
Yeah, so I am, oh, okay, there's a cat. Sorry.
She's a cat lady,
If
chicken
anyone
lady.
is just listening and not listening, I have a very large cat. Her name is Potato, and if
She
you
is
see her,
large. You guys
I
can't
really
see
need to
it.
show you to appreciate. Like she's a big
She's
girl.
massive.
She's a huge girl, but she likes to get into what I'm doing. So
I feel like that was planned.
sit
Like,
here. Okay.
who are you?
So, my name is Jen Hamilton, and I am a labor and delivery nurse. I'm a mom. I have chickens. I like to be online. I like to educate, talk about things that are happening in the world. And yeah, I'm very blessed to have many friends on the internet, and I like to try to sprinkle good in the world. And so, yeah, that's about it.
A while ago, I saw you ask about, hey, why are you here? And I was curious, what'd you get in those,
Yeah, it
Instagram
was
poll
so wild.
results? What did you get?
So on TikTok, the split was like 13% of people follow me because I'm a labor and delivery nurse, and 87% follow me for something else, which I thought was crazy because I mean, that question came from like my publisher because, I've just written a book on birth, and for my allegedly, if there was a next book, I would love to kind of broaden it past birth and talk about like, being a human. And I think that they were worried about kind of like, well, who would read that? And so they wanted to know like the split. I was like, I bet you that most people don't follow me because I'm a labor and delivery nurse. I
It's
bet that's
who would read that? And it's like, turns out 85% of the people who
yeah.
follow you would read it,
Yeah.
which is great.
So I was wanting to, all right, can you get down? So I was wanting to know like what the split was. So it was eye-opening to me because I would have thought like 40-60. I thought that would be the split, but no, it was much, much larger of a split than I thought.
Yeah, I know I mentioned when we started too. I think it's something I have loved following along with you, and I know it is something other people love too, is that you don't really know what you're gonna get. And someone would say, oh, that's chaotic, or I don't know. Think about like business-minded people who say people need to know what they're gonna get when they come to you. And I'm like, I just think a lot of people want to just get you, which means whatever that is about whoever it is that you're paying attention to. So that doesn't really surprise me. But it is funny to think a publisher could be worried, and allegedly another book could maybe even do even better than hopefully this one does, because look at that audience. Okay, so kind of on that note, actually, I know you were an ER nurse before. So I have two kind of questions around that. Is like, one, not necessarily the kind of, I would say a little bit boring, like how'd you land in L&D, but were you the ER nurse chasing down the pregnant ladies when typically all the ER nurses are like, I don't want to touch them? And then like, what is kind of most surprising about where you are right now, that you're in L&D, you're writing books, you're sharing everything about your life online?
I wanted absolutely nothing to do with anyone who might even have the appearance of being pregnant.
I'm shocked.
In labor and not in labor and delivery, in the emergency department, we are so afraid that you're going to birth in front of us and we're going to have to deal with that we want you to go anywhere else but here, right? Like we wanted you to send you to labor and delivery, even if it was like, oh, my toe hurts. Your toe can hurt over there because if something happens,
It's so true. It's so true.
I didn't having a patient that I couldn't see or talk to or assess really in any way. So I was deathly afraid of pregnant people. And so when I kind of had like a crisis of like I don't want to say a mental health crisis, but your girl could not do emergency anymore. Like it got to the point where I was like, I just can't. It was too much. And so I had like a really, really bad night one night working, and I got on the jobs page for my hospital and I just put in the schedule that I was hoping for, like 2 to 3 days a week. Cause at that point I was the assistant director of the department where I was working. And so I put in like 2 to 3 days a week, and I found a position for labor and delivery weekend option, which is just Saturdays and Sundays and like one day during the week, every other week. And I was like, that sounds nice. But during nursing school, I also did not like labor and delivery because it was very wet, It was a very wet place, and I did not know what all that was. And I was like,
it is a wet place.
But I was willing to try out the wetness to see if I could tolerate it for the schedule. Yeah. And then I went, so that was on a Friday night. I shadowed on Sunday, like 2 days later, and was done with emergency medicine at that day. Like I walked in, first of all, there were hella nurses for not a hella lot of patients. I was like, what do you mean there's 15 nurses and like 12 patients? What is happening here? And because in the emergency department, you just get stacked up with whatever you get. So I couldn't believe that the nurse to patient ratio was like 1-to-1 most of the time. like, what kind of dream place is this? And then I noticed that people were like happy to be there. I was like, this is weird. So, and then I got to watch the fellow nurses in action and see how they got to connect with their patients, which I really didn't get to do very much in the ER. It was just kind of like bada bing, bada boom. So I was like, hell yeah, I'm a labor and delivery nurse now. And by the next week, I had fully accepted the position and kind of went from there. But it was almost like a love at first sight kind of thing once I was on the floor. Like I think in nursing school, like I was kind of like about it. But whenever I had accepted the position, I'm like, this is it. This is what I want to do. So as far as something that surprised me, I'm surprised at how much I fell in love with it, I guess. Like my whole identity was wrapped in being an emergency department nurse before. And I'd never thought that I could be as good of a labor and delivery nurse as I was an ER nurse. Because in the ER, like by the time you've been there for several years, you know, you can basically handle whatever comes in, you know? And I felt very confident in the ER. And then whenever I became a labor and delivery nurse, it's kind of like going back to school, you know, like I felt like I knew nothing. And I'm surprised that I guess took to it so well that like once you get passionate about something, it's easy to learn, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel the opposite only in that I've only worked in L&D and I can't imagine, well, I feel maybe what you felt as an ER nurse of like, I could never be this good at something else or love something else this much. Cause that,
Right.
I don't know if you feel like you loved ER nursing, but certainly it seems like you were good at it. But it's the same, like, I can't go do something else. There's no way that I would. Yeah, it's just hard to imagine having that breadth of knowledge again, skill level, passion, like all of it line up. So it makes sense. It surprises me that you said you were the one like, no way. I guess I just assumed you'd be like, oh yeah, I was the one, like, let me at him. I had Tina on from Mom Nurse Tina, and she was that, right? And so she's like, I was an ER nurse, and when everyone ran away, I was running in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And so to me, that made such perfect sense that I just assumed you would say the same. But
And it was
also,
just a comfort level thing. Like I didn't do it enough to feel comfortable with it. So I was like, somebody else can handle this.
yeah, well, and I think most ER nurses do feel that way. It was the exact same, you know, for me, like you said, if they stubbed their toe, it was like, please go up to OB. We're not taking care of you. As soon as there's a baby on board,
right.
They don't want it. So it makes perfect sense. Interesting. What about the idea of you also, okay, you've changed nursing specialties. That's surprising. What about this idea of you are all over online sharing all this stuff? You are a book writer now. Was that maybe I'll write a book sitting in the back of your head someday? What about that stuff?
Never. And like I had publishers that had reached out to me previously whenever I was kind of sharing a lot of like labor and delivery knowledge and stuff and was kind of gaining momentum online. I had publishers reach out to me, and my initial thought and my initial email back to those people was like, I'm good, no thanks, because I don't consider myself a writer. I'm not even a journaler, you know, but I do know a thing about writing some nursing papers. That's all that I knew. So I didn't know if that would translate really well to something that people would want to read. I could write a patho on some diabetes, but you know, as far as like narrative, storytelling, that kind of stuff, I didn't know if I'd be good at it. So my initial response to them was, no, I'm good. And then I had other friends who had written books who were like, no, you should. Like, it really just comes from, you know, your experience in life and just talking about things that have happened, and you can try it out. So I wrote a sample and it got sent around and people liked it, and ended up with, you know, different offers and stuff. And I was like, I guess we'll try this. Because whenever you're writing a book through a publisher and stuff, a lot of times it's not like you've written the book yet. You're just writing a sample, you know, and then they're kind of putting their faith in you that you're going to do okay with the writing. So yeah, that was nothing that I ever had in my, you know, 5-year plan or even my life plan. It wasn't on my radar at all, but I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be
You're
able
so
to.
grateful you're getting choked up. It's so sweet.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to not just, you know, hopefully help people with the stories in the book, but also to like process my own things that I've been through, because one thing about being online is that it's very hard to find a therapist. Like, I have had a few, and the second they cross over from like, oh yeah, I know you online, or like I follow you, I'm like, I just want to be anonymous for a minute.
That is so interesting to think about, and a whole other conversation.
So I really don't
be tough.
Yeah, I don't have that outlet to be able to process things that I deal with at work. And this is it's heavy. Like, the stuff that we do is very heavy, and it's not like you can just talk about it with anybody. So to be able to write about those things in a way where I could, like, what's the word? Anonymize. Like, all the stories are like, I've changed things in order to make them anonymous, or like merge 2 or 3 patients together so that, nobody can like pick it out and be like, oh, that's me. But they're all still very real to me, because they're all things that I've been through, just things that I haven't been able to talk about. So that was super cathartic to me to be able to write about. So I'm very grateful to have the opportunity.
That's cool. I cannot wait to read it. I'm excited to hear the audio as well, because I know you did your audio version, which I feel like, people obviously love your voice, and you have a very you voice. So I'm sure that you can feel it all over the audio book. Okay, I wanted to talk about some birth stuff with you, obviously. We can circle back on the book a little bit at the end, because I want you to share a tiny bit more. But you talk so much about protecting your patients, supporting. I just love your vocabulary, and I'm sure it's threaded throughout your books as well about some of that. So I actually wanted to read a quote to you really quick, and then thought we could just chat about it a little bit as it pertains to all these families having babies right now. So the quote, and I don't know where it came from, says, "The fear of accepting every intervention is the same as the fear that refuses every intervention. True autonomy is the ability to pause, understand, and choose." And I saw that a while ago floating around on social media, and I just loved it, because I feel like we have this issue now where people are scared to say yes to anything, but also scared to say no to anything. And so they're left with this kind of hands up, like, I don't know what to do about any of this. So when it comes to that, like, idea of autonomy and what that actually looks like for your patients, or maybe what you're laid out inside of your book as well, what does that mean for you when you say, hey, this is how I protect my patients, or I protect your right to choose? What does that kind of protection vocabulary mean for you?
Yeah, so every single patient comes in with their own story, right? And all of their background kind of paints the way that they interact with the world. And when you have someone who comes in afraid of intervention because they know that, like, cascade of interventions can lead to things that we don't want, or if you have someone who is just terrified to go against anything that you say, I mean, I think that both of those feelings are so valid, right? One is, in trying to protect autonomy and protect themselves from unnecessary things that could cause them harm. And then the other is just so fearful of any harm, so in making the wrong decision. So what I always say is that I will protect your right to make whatever your decision you want to make, even if it's not something that I would do. So I consider my job as a labor and delivery nurse just a communicator. I'm here to communicate changes. I'm here to communicate your risks and benefits of each decision. And past that, whatever you decide is what I will support, even if, like I said, I wouldn't do the same. So I think that risks and benefits mean different things to different patients, and someone's individual risk for something may be different than, standard risk, and only the patient can take a look at those things and decide whether that risk is something that they want to take.
The cat is back, you guys. Potato, you just really want to be in here.
She's like 20 pounds. I'm not even
when you just dropped her on the floor, I could hear the thunk.
Yeah.
Or you guys
it sounded harder than it was.
Yeah. Anyway, back to our patients. It's what you were saying too, I love, is the support versus protect dichotomy. Like, I feel like people get hung up there of, like, if you say I support you, there's this idea of what you're choosing, I would choose it too, I support that. And I feel like what you're saying is, no, I don't have to want to do the same things, but I will protect your like privilege and right to choose something.
Exactly.
And they're not
Exactly.
the same. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what does that look like when you are in a room and a provider who is, let's say, above you, like a doc or a midwife, is not practicing in the same way? Like, practically speaking, how does that look like for a nurse when they're like, I don't know, I'm going to go ahead and check your cervix and strip your membranes. Sound good? Like that type of conversation. What's that look like for you as a nurse?
I think that's the hardest for especially new nurses to find this. I call it finding your balls.
It's true.
So, yeah. The way that it looks like for me is that I communicate with the patient what I wish that person had just said. So, for instance, let's say that we've got a doc who comes in. Oh, let me back up. I will pre-game with the patient these conversations also, right? So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say, and this has actually happened in real life, have a patient who comes in, her cervical exam downstairs was like 4.5. Her water just broke maybe like 30 minutes before. She's having painful, consistent contractions every 2 to 3 minutes. She's rocking and rolling. Okay. I will tell, and if I look and see who's on, that's really going to be able to tell me what's about to happen. So
I'm just going to clarify. You mean by looking and seeing who's on, you're talking about which doctor is going to come in and like be in charge of how this all might go. Yeah.
So if I see someone who I know tends to practice in a certain way, we'll talk about that. Whether that's high intervention, low intervention, we'll talk about what kinds of things I can anticipate for her so that we can talk about what she feels about those things so that if anything starts to turn in one direction, I know how to best advocate for her. So I know that this particular doc wants every single person on PIT, whether they need it or not. And this was somebody who there was no medical need. I'll say that. So I said, in just a minute, we'll call this Dr. Pitocin Patty. Okay. In just a minute, Pitocin Patty's going to come in here and she's going to say, I'm going to check your cervix. What she means by that is she would like your permission and your consent to check your cervix. You have the right to accept or decline her cervical exam. I said, and regardless of what your cervix is, she's going to look at me and she's going to say, start PIT 2 by 2. And what she means by that, when she says that, is she is asking your permission to put you on a medication that is going to make your contractions stronger and closer together. My nursing assessment for you is that you are having strong, consistent contractions every 2 to 3 minutes. So you get to make your own big girl decision about whether that's something that you would like to have or not. And if you say no, I give them language, okay? I say, if that's something you would like, you can say, sure, let's do it. If that is not something that you would like, you can say, no, thank you. I'll let you know if I change my mind. If you do say, no, thank you, I want you to know what she's going to say, and that is, she's going to tell you that you are now at risk for infection, and without the Pitocin, that risk is increasing. So I kind of give them language to either accept or decline, whatever, because I don't think that people understand that you don't have to accept every single thing, and sometimes there are situations in which providers, doctors, midwives, whoever, just kind of get in this rhythm of what they normally do, and that's just how they do stuff. So for this particular patient, every single thing that I said was going to happen happens. And so she looked at me after the doctor left the room and she's like, how did you know? I was like, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. But if I don't have the opportunity to pregame that conversation and I have a provider that just comes in and starts doing stuff, then I will kind of intervene and translate for the patient what I wish they would have said.
Hey friend, quick pause for just a second. If you are listening to this podcast because you want to feel more prepared, more confident, and less freaked out about birth, that is exactly why I created the Your Body, Your Birth course. This birth course will not tell you what kind of birth you should want, and nobody has the right to do that. It is about helping you understand what's happening in your body, what your options actually are, and how to walk into your birth feeling grounded, excited, ready, instead of overwhelmed and scared. When you have education like this, everything changes. your mindset, your conversations with your care team, and the birth experience itself. No more relying on random opinions, okay? Stop scrolling. Take intentional action with me and start trusting your body, your voice, and your decisions today. Head over to www.thelabormama.com/birth, also linked in your show notes. And be sure to use the code podcast at checkout to save 20% and start working towards this better birth for you right now. Okay, let's get you back to the episode.
So doc comes in, we do a cervical exam with the patient's permission. And there was one time that I had a doctor say, hook to me. And you and I will know what that means. That doctor was wanting me to give him the amni hook so that he could break this patient's water. There was zero conversation about doing that prior to the cervical exam. So I'm in charge of the hook, right? He doesn't have the hook. So we pause and I say, what this doctor is saying right now to me is that he believes that this is a safe time for us to break your water. What this means is, sticking this hook inside of you, rupturing this bag, fluid will come out, and then kind of give like real quick rundown of, risk benefit situation. The doctor was pissed at me. So angry. But I feel like everyone deserves informed consent. Everyone. And I'm not going to let somebody do something to you because that's what they think that they should do, So he said to me, like, while I'm doing that, he's like, are you asking me if it's okay? Like, just being snarky.
You're like, no, I'm not actually. I don't care.
I don't care. So I try my best to, in those situations, I just consider myself a translator because I also want to manage people up. And I don't want there to be like a confrontation between the two of us in front of the patient. I think that's inappropriate. So I try to just consider myself a translator of what I wish they would have said.
I think it's so valuable. Like, there's these little terms sometimes that, like, if you're pregnant right now, you're listening to this, just have these be this little, I don't know, little red flags sometimes. And they're not always a bad thing, but just these providers who kind of just use comments and statements like, does that sound good? Like where they've kind of, where they're not necessarily giving you choice. Like, we're going to go ahead and do this. Sound good? Like those statements typically aren't a full informed conversation. And so there's these little times where I think, I don't even know that there's this inherent desire to take away this choice from the patient, but I think in healthcare, sometimes the way that we say things, be that a doctor or a nurse or whoever, like we almost make the patient feel like they don't really get to say no, if that's what they want to say, because it's kind of like, you want to roll with what we just laid out for you? Cool. And it's like, wait, like, can you give me the yes and the no side of it? And so I think that ability to pregame with the provider, like what a gift if you can have a nurse who can do that. And then just as the patient to be able to say like, okay, you just gave me actually options. Like, let's make sure I know what both of them are. Like if you weren't there for that specific patient at the time, if they'd been able to say, okay, you want to break my water? Like, I know what hook means. And then be able to say, wait, let's talk pros and cons and that puts a lot of responsibility on the patient sometimes, right? To almost have to decipher vocabulary being used, and that's not fair. So I don't want someone to think, hey, this is your job to know these little isms that are being said, but also say, I guess I am telling you guys, like, yeah, like know that you can pause a conversation and stop and be clear about what you're agreeing to or what you're saying no to as well. Because I think the ball just gets rolling sometimes and it doesn't feel malicious, nor is it. I mean, most of the time, but it's like the ball's rolling down the hill. And as a patient, then you're like, I don't even really know how to stop this or where I stopped being heard or something like that.
Yeah.
So when it comes to kind of like to stem off this conversation a little bit, why do you think, I feel like online there's this pushback from, I don't know, some providers at that idea of a nurse or whoever, actually, anyone's saying online, hey, you have the right to refuse anything. And that like really gets hackles up from some providers. I'm not trying to like toot my own horn. To me, I'm like, yeah, that's true. Like you do have the right to refuse anything. Why do you think that can make people feel so spicy?
So I think that providers hearing or getting upset about hearing someone say you can decline anything, I think that it comes from the worry that patients will decline anything and everything because they can and throw all caution to the wind just in order to decline something. Like that's all, like that they can't wait to say no to stuff. And I think that we need to give patients more credit than that, and that we don't need to infantilize them to think that we have to make decisions for them. But I think that the message in knowing that you can decline anything is that there is choice. And often, most of the time, there are many or a few paths to the same destination. And it doesn't mean that it's one size fits all and every single patient needs to follow every single protocol and policy. Different people are going to have different risk benefit profiles of stuff. And like, it's easy for a hospital to say like, oh, we don't want you to eat or drink anything in labor. Well, you're putting that over so many people that would be just fine to eat and drink with very, very little risk at all. And so when you're putting that blanket over everyone, you're harming a lot of people by putting policies in place that are not taking individual risk into account, right? Like, for instance, if I went and had a baby, would I have an IV? Sure, right? But there are so many patients with a very low risk profile that come in and don't want one. And that's their own risk to take. I think that we need to do a better job of just, educating people on risks and benefits and then documenting their response and how we are supporting them in that response. I think that since OB is so litigious, people are so worried that if a patient makes a choice, that it will end badly and then it'll come back on us. And I can absolutely empathize with that because nobody wants a bad outcome. And we feel like if we're following policy and procedure, then we're going to be protected. But we're the ones that have to follow policy and procedures. The patients don't, So as long as I'm informing you of your choices, I think that you should be able to make that decision.
One thing I feel like providers can do better at too is not pigeonholing a patient because they've said no, like let's say to the IV, right? Because, an IV is typically part of admitting them or whatever, and that's part of the process. And so I feel like there can be this tendency, again, nurse or doctor or midwife or whoever's around, depending on what they think about all this stuff, is to think, oh, she refused the IV. She's one of those, right? And we get almost in our heads right away, or someone on the team does, about like, oh, they're just going to refuse everything. And then it can lead to this, and this is on our part, right? We're screwing up here if we get into this thing of like, it's just one of those patients who's going to say no to everything and won't listen to anything. And I just think that can kind of creep up too soon or too often, when sometimes it's just a patient who has this well thought out plan. They know their risks, they know all the things. And so they've said, hey, I don't want an IV right now, but I'll let you know if that changes or if I feel like I'm not hydrated. Like that's such a practical way for them to make the decision or approach the decision. And I think sometimes then we pigeonhole them. Yeah. And so then patients, rightly so, if this is happening, have this fear of like, well, I don't want them to just put me in this box, right? That I'm like the obstinate one who's refusing everything. And so I feel like providers need to do a lot better job of recognizing that each individual choice is being made, right? And they get the privilege to make the next one and the next one and the next one. Mm-hmm. And patients also like hold on to that too, of like, I can say no to this and then say yes to this. I don't have to be on the no track for every single thing, or on the yes track, every single thing you say I'll do. Like they're allowed to kind of dance around for what feels good and right to them with what they know and what's going on and all of that. So,
and if I do have a patient that declines, something that is deemed medically necessary by a doctor or midwife, what I'll do is let them know that I will let them know if anything changes in their circumstances that might have them reconsider, right? So like, hey, this has happened to me a few times. I have somebody without an IV and we're doing intermittent monitoring. Okay, well, during my intermittent monitoring, I'm hearing something suspicious. So we switch to continuous and I'm seeing like something weird. Hey, something has changed. And one way that I can help you is by doing an IV, giving some fluids, that kind of stuff. So letting them know if things have changed in the course of their care, and also talking about okay, if things do change, what are our options? So let's say that they don't have an IV and we're going to deliver at some point. Okay, well, if we begin to see like really heavy bleeding, like this might be something to think about if we're, in order for us to give you different medications or something like that. I think also talking about contingency plans to make sure that the patient is well informed so that if something does change, that we're not just saying, because sometimes I think we think that they're just going to say no, and we don't tell them like, hey, this new thing has happened, because we just assume they're going to say no to stuff. So I think that it's all about having more conversation, more communication, and not just, like you said, pigeonholing people into being the person that's just going to say no to everything.
Yeah. That like constant communication and updating, my brain's just thinking of some of these big topics that you hear about online, like, do you have to have an IV? Do you need continuous monitoring? Can you eat during labor? Like how all of those necessities can change based on what is or isn't going on, but how often is it communicated or taught like that? Like right now, perfectly practical for you to say no to XYZ. But 4 hours later, if something's going on, is someone communicating, hey, this is how things have changed, like, would you like to consider the IV right now because this is the pro or the con? Because it feels weird, but pros and cons can actually kind of change depending on what's going on in the labor. They're not so absolute, right? Some of them might be, but a pro, I feel like particularly a pro sometimes in some of these bigger kind of decisions people are making when they're like making a birth plan and stuff, a pro can change, right? Like if your baby's having D cells and they weren't, well, the IV for me, then a pro might be like, hey, we could hydrate you, we could utilize this, like, whereas that isn't necessarily going to be an absolute pro when everything looks great and you've come in 6 hours prior and baby's looking great on the monitor. Like that things do kind of change like that. But if the patient hasn't been given that information, then they might feel like, well, no, I'm just not doing that. And it's like, well, let's talk about how the decision may be changing for you, and then give you the chance.
Exactly.
To make a new one.
The one thing that I tell people when I first meet them is I give them promises that I promise to do for them. One of those things is that I promise to never keep secrets from you. So if there's something that I can see on the horizon as a possibility, I want to talk to you about it early and often so that I know how best to advocate for you in that situation. And I think that really comes into play if you have someone who has made a decision that may, based on circumstances, might need to be reconsidered. And it doesn't mean that they'll change their mind. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to make sure that you just have the information that you need that's accurate and up to date in order to make that decision. And then I'm going to support whatever you say, and I will not bring it back up unless something has changed.
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes back to the idea you were talking about of like infantilizing them or thinking they don't have the capacity to take in knowledge or understand how things have changed, because there's this idea of like, I don't want to scare you and point out that your baby's having lates or some, whatever it is. But actually how sweet it is for a parent to just say, hey, like, you see this monitor, here's some stuff I'm paying attention to. Like, this could mean that, like, just giving them that. Like, why are we not trusting them with that? They're about to take that human home. And they get to raise it. Like, I think that in labor, we can trust them with that stuff as well, but we feel scared to, like, oh, we don't want to scare you. Or we certainly don't want to be making them make a fear-based choice. Like, I'm going to scare you so bad about XYZ with your baby that you're going to do what I want. Because that can be manipulated, I think. But I just think as a nurse, especially because you're with them so much and you're watching all the things, to feel comfortable, like maybe new nurse, if you're listening to this, to feel comfortable, like giving them that education and trusting them to not panic and to not freak out and to take it in and make choices as parents, because that's what they are. Yeah. Okay. I want to throw a couple little, I know we kind of talked about some birth scenarios, just a couple at you just for fun. Like, what would your response be, and or what would you suggest to a patient in this situation? The first one's kind of basic, but do I need a birth plan, and or how do you clarify what they do need coming into birth?
So I think it's amazing and awesome when people investigate things prior to. Right. It helps me so much as your nurse to be able to understand not just the kind of things you want or don't want, but why. I think that that's what's missing from a lot of birth plans is like, what about this part of your birth plan protects your values? Like, what value is it that you're wanting to protect with this birth plan item? So that I can protect whatever that is, even if things go differently. So, for instance, if somebody comes in with intermittent fetal monitoring on their birth plan, but they came in because they're not feeling their baby move, if continuous fetal monitoring is something that they, agree to once we have identified that there might be an issue, knowing that it was because you didn't want to be tied to the bed, that was why you wanted intermittent, that helps me so much because, girl, we're going to be moving and grooving. And I will make sure that even with continuous fetal monitoring, that you feel mobile and vertical or however you want to be. So I think that knowing why you want things is important. But more than anything, more than any line on a birth plan, I want to know who you are as a human and how I can best communicate with you. Do you need visuals? How do you learn best? Like, what kind of information do you need to be able to make a decision and feel good about it and feel confident about it? What do you want your environment to feel like? How can I make this environment feel less scary? How can I protect you if there's things that you've been through in your life that make today extra scary? Or if there's anything that I might not think about that I can unintentionally trigger for you based on things that you've been through? Or what kind of things bring you comfort? Like, what can I do to help make sure that you feel safe today? For instance, like, I hate it when people touch my hair, but I love a back rub, so like knowing those things so that I can both not aggravate you and also bring you comfort is all about what I consider birth vibes, so that even if things go different than you thought, that you still can leave that experience feeling informed, empowered, and supported.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I'm just picturing probably the number of times a nurse, including myself, has maybe touched their hair or something, and they never said they didn't like it, and then probably later like, oh, that nurse kept touching my hair. You're like, please tell us, because we actually can stop doing that. We just want to comfort you.
We can pivot. We can find something else.
We can find another way to love you well. I was also laughing thinking about visual learners, and if someone was saying, hey, I'm a visual learner, the idea of you or any nurse being like, I'm going to act this stuff out, just what that can look like to try and meet some education needs. But I'm sure you are talented at that if they need it. Okay, that's funny. One of my questions was this idea of a friend saying, I literally do not want anyone to touch me. How do I make that happen? Would you have more to say to that, actually?
Telling them. You got to be straight up with us, because we get on autopilot, and guess what autopilot means? We gonna touch you. And it doesn't mean, I always ask people before I touch them for the very first time, like, is it okay if I touch you? And I try to be cognizant of that throughout, but so much of our job is comforting people and touching them. And so if you don't want to be touched, I need to know that. And right up front, please tell me and remind me if ever I mess up. You just got to tell us and remind us if we mess up, because that is something that we could mess up on.
Yeah. No, I think it definitely is. And I know from having babies, that specific one almost stems from my own thing. I did not want anyone to touch me at all. And they're comforting and they want to be there. And I'm like, I want to be alone in a hole. I mean, I really just didn't want any of the stuff that I thought I maybe would. But if you don't tell them, they're probably going to, the default for most people supporting anyone in birth is going to be really near and probably to touch. So
and I think
it's a good thing to think through.
Yeah. And talking about times that are emergencies that maybe touch would need to happen is important, because if I'm pushing out a baby, I don't want anybody to touch me. That's a time that I don't want to be touched. But let's say that we're pushing out a baby and we have a shoulder dystocia, right? That's a time when touch is very, very important. And talking about if you don't want to be touched, your nurse talking about, well, in these scenarios, touch may be required in order to keep you and your baby safe. Can we talk about those in advance so that we are all on the same page and you don't feel like I'm trying to assault you, if that happens.
Yeah. We don't want that, do we?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Let's say as a husband birth partner, she's asking for an epidural, but she told me she doesn't want one or to stop her. What do we do? What's going on in that room when they're like, help us, Jen, what should we do?
So let me make sure I'm understanding correctly. So the patient told their husband ahead of time that they don't want,
I'm not doing an epidural.
Don't let me get an epidural.
Now she wants one. And so they're looking at you, wanting one. Birth partner saying, she said we should stop
Yeah.
What do you
So
do as a nurse?
what I do is I tell them that labor is like a baton race of coping, and I can give them more batons. Cause like I remind them, like, okay, we talked about this and I'm just doing what you asked me to do. I can give you more batons to cope with. So like I think that's really hard to decide things in labor. And so if you give them like an entire Chili's menu of like, okay, we could try this or this or this or this or this, it becomes overwhelming and it's hard to cope. So what I do is I give them two choices. Okay, we can either, I don't know, fill in whatever you want to do. We can get in the shower or we can try nitrous. And then, epidural is always an option, but we can try these things first. I'm just trying to support what you said with a clearer mind. I will always, always, always ultimately do what the patient is telling me that they want to do. If they truly decide in that moment, they're not interested in any of my options, for sure, absolutely. But I'm also trying to honor what the patient wanted before. So I will honor both, but I want to help you achieve your goals in whatever way that makes sense to you. So I'll try to offer two options that are non-epidural options that we can try, and then try to ride that baton race farther than we were before. And also, by the time someone tells me I can't do this anymore, they're usually almost there.
So you could remind them of that too. Yeah. I mean, that's usually, it usually means transition, right? And so then you're more like, hey, this is actually a great thing. Yeah. That's definitely true. Okay. On that, I want you to keep going a tiny bit because I heard you talk on another podcast, I think with Dr. Lincoln, about the idea of blowing your load too early, I believe was your vocabulary. So since we're talking about that and that idea of someone saying, hey, I don't want epidural, or, maybe things change, will you elaborate on that for anyone thinking about pain management options and what that means?
People get so excited during pregnancy to learn about coping techniques in labor, right? So they learn about, either like the labor comb or like the spiky fidget thing. They learn about breathing. They learn about hypnobirthing. They learn about affirmations, like all these different things. And I'm going to use the example of an induction. Okay. So let's say, or you come in super early labor. I feel like sometimes when people come to the hospital, they feel like this is the time to use those coping strategies. But what I see people do that really messes them up, if they're wanting an unmedicated labor, is that they blow their load early and they don't hold each baton as long as they can before going to the next one. So by saying blow your load early, I mean they fly through every single coping strategy that they learned before they, I don't want to say needed it, like they probably did need some kind of stuff, but before they were desperate for it. Like before you go to the next coping strategy, I want you to be desperate for it, because the longer that you go on one coping strategy before reaching for the next, the longer you'll go in your labor before reaching for an epidural if you do it all. So don't be getting in the water at 1 centimeter. Don't do it. That's transition stuff right there. Like we need to save that for the last. Use those low level coping strategies early on and ride that sucker till the wheels fall off before you reach for the next one. And that can help you reach your unmedicated goals.
Yeah. Well, that's perfect. One of my friends is a doula and shares online, and they had shared a reel on TikTok first and it went viral. And, the comment sections always get a little spicy typically if something is viral. And it was basically a doula telling a patient, no, you can't get in the water yet. And it was essentially that premise of a good doula, or say a good provider, is like, don't blow your load early. Don't get in the water if you're only 5 centimeters and you want to do this whole thing unmedicated. Like that's part of their work is this idea of batons is perfect, but like, I don't want you to jump to the best final baton you want, because it's probably not going to last you for 5 more centimeters.
Hurting and wet. That's what you're going to.
Well, I also have never wanted to be in the water. It's funny when you said labor is so wet, because I'm like, I don't want to be in the water. Wanted to try and have the kids unmedicated, but don't come near me with a pool or a shower, because the idea of being hurting and wet is, horrible to me. But God bless everyone who loves it, because it seems like water is incredible, but it is not for me.
Well for some people, and I love that.
Yeah. More power to them. Just wait to get in if you're trying to go unmedicated. That's the lesson. Okay, I want to ask you about the AWHONN staffing thing that you've talked a lot about on social media. This can be the last quick thing, but I've seen people say, oh, that's cool. You're saying call hospitals, ask if they follow AWHONN staffing standards, and figure that out about their unit. But what do you say to someone who says, Jen, I called them and they didn't give me a good answer. They told me no, they didn't want to answer the question. Then what is a patient or a friend, whoever's talking in this situation, then what would you tell them in response to that?
I think that when you go in to have your baby, if you feel like you're not being paid attention to or you're not getting good care, a question that's very valid is to ask your nurse how many patients they're caring for. And if you find yourself in that situation where your nurse is caring for, 3 laboring patients, that's completely unacceptable. So that's when you can escalate. And I think that it's important to kind of lean on your support people for this also, to escalate that to the house supervisor or whoever, to draw attention to the fact that we have unsafe staffing on this unit. And listen, AWHONN supports turning off PIT on everybody on the unit until you have safe staffing. It needs to be that big of a deal, because we cannot provide our patients with safe care if we're caring for too many patients in order to do that. And can you imagine a private physician finding out that a nurse turned off PIT on their patient?
As soon as you said that, I was like, the unit I worked on had like 28 beds. I'm like, can you imagine turning off PIT in 17 different rooms all at the same time?
Yep.
I mean,
you want to get something done though, you start doing that, and I bet you that they're going to find some nurses, Yeah. So I think that is a question, like knowing how many patients your nurse is caring for is a valid question, and escalating it if it's an unacceptable answer is also valid.
Yeah. To me, I hear like, hey, an awareness, right? Call your unit and get some details and information, just something to carry in. And then if you were to be in labor and feel like this feels like there's no one here for me, then you can go ahead and escalate it. Because I think it's not like everyone's going to get the perfect answer if they call all the OB units. In my mind, I picture we try to as much as we can. The patient census changes, so we'll call a new nurse. Like, you're probably going to get something like that, which is essentially saying we're doing the best we can. Sometimes it's not the way it's supposed to be, right? Like, I feel like that's probably the answer a lot of patients would get. Yep. Maybe someone saying like, we don't have to answer that question, which would be a little bit of a red flag. But really, it's that, to me, the idea for, those listening who are about to be this patient of like, well, what do I do in the moment? Which is great. And I think that idea of escalating can sound so dramatic, right? But it's the same thing for if you're not meshing with your nurse and you feel like you gotta maybe fire them or see if someone else is available, you're going to have to escalate that and maybe speak to the charge nurse instead and see if that's a possibility for you too. So maybe not to think that escalating or asking to speak to the charge nurse is a bad thing, right? They're available. That's why they're there. I know that you're a charge nurse. Like, that's your job, is to keep an eye on all the things going on in all the rooms. So
we can call it elevating,
I like it.
We're not
elevating the issue.
We're elevating the issue.
Sounds a little more glorious though. I like it though. Escalation just sounds bad, like you're being confrontational. And I think when people hear some of this vocab, even intervention, I talk about this a lot, and we don't have to go down this road, but it seems so negative, right? But interventions are like interruptions, right? Sometimes these interruptions are good. They're exactly what you need. Sometimes they're not, right? So to not necessarily hear these words sometimes and instantly be like, oh, I need to be freaked out right now, that sometimes it's actually on the way to something better. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. You mentioned the word birth vibes when you were answering some of these questions. I know that's the name of your book. Mm-hmm. My one follow-up question on that, and then let us know when it releases, because I know it's coming up, is what's that difference for you between like birth vibes and birth plan? Just say that one more time for us so we get, why did Jen think she needed to write a book? Because there's a lot of birth books out there. So what is so important about birth vibes, I'm air quoting here, versus
so else. I noticed that there were a lot of people coming into the hospital with very specific birth plans, but it didn't, like, things could go perfect on a birth plan. Check. Everything exactly what you said you wanted could happen that way, but you could still leave that experience feeling unheard, disrespected, unsupported. But on the flip side of that, you could have a birth plan that goes completely off the rails, but leave feeling communicated with, supported, and feel positive about that experience if the other things around your experience held true. So it's like building a cocoon of safety around you so that even if things go different on your birth plan than you thought, that you still can have a positive experience. So things like, how do you need to be communicated with in order to feel that you have been communicated with empathetically, compassionately, and accurately with all the information you need? How do you adapt when things go different than you thought? What kind of environment do you want to have? Like, what do you want the vibes of your room to feel like? Do you want it to be like joyous and happy and light? Do you want it to be somber and quiet and peaceful? Like, the vibes of the room are important. Who are you bringing with you, and what are they going to do for you? Because I think preparing those people for helping you is super important, and choosing those people carefully, because sometimes the person who makes the most sense on the outside, like relationally to you, may not be who you need by your side. And that's okay to figure out. And it's okay to choose somebody that may not make the most sense. And then other things like closure. And, even if your birth goes awesome, having all the questions about what happened answered before you leave. Because I know that you and I both know that sometimes you can hear a birth story that to us is like super normal, like very normal things that happen during labor and birth, but it gets instilled and imprinted on the memory so traumatically because the questions that they had were not answered. So, like transition can be super traumatic if you don't know what to expect. Getting an epidural can be super traumatic if you didn't know what to expect. So I think that having those questions answered before you leave is all part of the birth vibes experience, but it's like a cocoon of safety birth plan, right? So it's planning for the things that are plannable, that you can really bank on, so that even if things go awesome, even if things go weird, that you still have this cocoon of safety around you, so that you can feel that you can leave that experience feeling positive about it.
Yeah. Oh, it makes perfect sense. And I think we jump right to the birth plan with like, I don't want to push on my back, and I don't want to, and it's very scenario specific. And we forget, like, how do I feel in that moment of birth, or how do I want to feel in whatever that moment is? Yeah. No, I love it. When are you officially releasing? I know you did that special pre-release for those who are already pregnant, but when is it available?
It comes out May 5th. You can pre-order right now so that whenever it comes out on May 5th, it should be at your door.
Okay. Sounds good. Last question that I ask everyone, well, kind of two, but people probably already mostly know. Where can they find you online? I know your handle's the same on all the places. And then what is one thing in your life right now that's bringing you a ton of joy?
Oh, that's such a sweet question. You can find me anywhere at Jen. You can just look up Jen Hamilton and you'll find me. What's bringing me joy is my chickens. I call them my biological children because I'm now hatching like eggs that my own baby chickens have
made. Like you're a grandmother.
Yeah, you are. Chickens. And so we have this coop outside, and I go out there, just sit out there, and I just watch them. I just look at them being cute. They look like softballs with fur on them right now.
They're so cute. Well, as someone who follows you on the platforms, I know that we get a peek at your chickens sometimes. Yeah. So you guys, if you want chicken content, follow along.
Got it. Come along.
Got it for you. All right. Well, good luck with all the book stuff. I'm excited to read and to listen. It's available in audio as well, you guys. I can't remember if I mentioned that here or with her before, but I feel like the audio version is going to be pretty great too. So just so you know. Thanks, Jen. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Lo and Behold podcast. I hope there was something for you in today's episode that made you think, made you laugh, or made you feel seen. For show notes and links to the resources, freebies, or discount codes mentioned in this episode, please head over to loandbeholdpodcast.com. If you aren't following along yet, make sure to tap subscribe or follow in your podcast app so we can keep hanging out together. And if you haven't heard it yet today, you're doing a really good job. A little reminder for you before you go. Opinions shared by guests of this show are their own and do not always reflect those of myself and the Labor Mama platform. Additionally, the information you hear on this podcast or that you receive via any linked resources should not be considered medical advice. Please see our full disclaimer at the link in your show notes.